Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Some more news for this Michigan program coming out of the recruiting trail Friday morning. Three-star defensive lineman Benny Patterson committing to Michigan in the 2025 class. And this is a really interesting prospect who early on in the process committed to Cincinnati, was committed to Cincinnati for a long time. And then over the last about month, you've seen this kid's recruitment really skyrocket. USC really interested, Penn State really interested, Michigan becomes really interested and kind of gets it done. And I think a really fascinating storyline to follow. I got two fascinating storylines for this one. Number one, defensive line coach Lou Esposito, like it doesn't get better than him in terms of sniffing out these three-star gems that develop into NFL caliber guys. Like you go back to his time at Western Michigan, multiple guys that he recruited out of high school that were they ranked even lower than Benny Patterson that came to Western Michigan under him, developed into NFL dudes. This is probably another one of those guys that he sees the early senior year film, says, I want him. I think I can do some special things with him, brings him in. I think, secondly, he very, very eerily reminds me of Chris Jenkins coming out. Like, you could take a look at Chris Jenkins coming out in 2020, the same conversation, right? Chris Jenkins, Benny Patterson, both probably going to play on the inside of the defensive line. But you look at both of those guys and say, they're only sitting around 240 pounds coming out of high school. Where are they going to play? And you look at Chris Jenkins took 2 years, but when Chris Jenkins put the weight on and got to that requisite weight to play on the inside of the defensive line, we found an absolute diamond in the rough. I think you can say a lot of the same things about Benny Patterson, where you look at him and say, yeah, he's undersized right now for a three-tech interior defensive lineman. What happens if he gets up to 290 pounds? Because you look at the frame and say he's got a big frame. You know what I mean? Like he has a frame that he can put some weight on. He's not like a real slender guy. I would think he plays on the inside of the defensive line. I would think it takes a year to get him to the size that he needs. But this kid flashes some traits. Now I want to get into a little bit of the film and talk about what I think he brings to this Michigan defense. Now, before we do, as always, to the Michigan fans, what does Wink Martindale say on Twitter? Buckle up. I think it's going to be a very fun next couple of weeks and months for this Michigan program, not only on the recruiting trail, but in terms of talent acquisition. Like I fully expect after this 2024 year for Michigan to get really aggressive in the transfer portal. We'll be covering and talking a lot about it. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's get into this one. Now, you look at Benny Patterson, I think the first thing you want to talk about is really, really athletic for the size. This kid's get off, how he flies around the football field. It's a little bit different. Now, he doesn't have the size that you're looking for just yet to play on the inside of the defensive line, where I think he ultimately ends up. That's where he plays at the high school level. This is kind of like betting on a twitched up athlete and saying, all right, we got to get some weight on you. And if we can maintain that twitch and that athleticism as we get you up to 290 to 300 pounds, that's kind of what we're looking for here with Benny Patterson. And you take a look at the film, and again, one, I trust Lou Esposito in his development. He's developed a lot of these kind of guys going back to his time at Western Michigan. He must see something in Benny Patterson. I think it starts with this kid off the ball is insane. Like really, really violent first step, consistently in the backfield. He just doesn't move like a 250-pound body. That's what stands out to me the most. He can do a lot of different things. You see him kind of running on a little twist stunt here. It kind of bends around this tackle like an edge rusher, which I think is cool too. I mean, he's like a bendy, twitchy interior defensive lineman that you can do a lot with. I mean, you take a look at some of the flexibility as we're running this outside corner. That's kind of what you like. Again, I think he's a developmental prospect. I'd be very surprised if he plays early for Michigan in the 2025 season, but I love how disruptive and how athletic he is. Again, really, really good first step. You freeze frame it. He's by far the first one off the line of scrimmage, follows this pulling guard kind of right in the hip pocket of this pulling guard, chasing down from the backside. I mean, that's what you want in an interior defensive lineman. Yeah, you want size, but you also want athleticism. You look at Michigan. I mean, I'm not going to straight up come out and compare him to Mason Graham, But you look at what Mason Graham is so good at. He's a freak show athlete. Yeah, the play strength is there, but the athleticism for a 315-pound body, it's kind of on a different level. Benny Patterson kind of reminds me of that kind of athlete. He uses his hands really well too, just gets off blocks. Again, I think this kid moves at a really, really unique level for 250 pounds. I think it makes a ton of sense for Michigan to bet on this kid. And again, maybe he ends up just playing as a heavy handed edge rusher, but I think he's going to play on the inside because when you get the weight on him, and again, the pictures that you see of him, he's got a frame that you think you can add weight to, kind of like Chris Jenkins was coming out. I think that's really exciting. Now, you look at Michigan in 2025, up to the 14th best class in the country. More importantly, trending for a ton of commitments. I wouldn't be surprised that we're breaking down a few commitments for Michigan over the weekend and early next week, and potentially even later tonight. I mean, you look at Shamari Earls, you look at that wide receiver committed to NC State, you look at potentially Bryce Underwood, which I'll say this about Bryce Underwood. I would be surprised if it happens quick. I think this one is a longer burn that's probably going to happen towards the back half of November into early December signing day. That being said, like we continue to hear reports that Michigan's a legit contender for Bryce Underwood, and I don't think Carter Smith would have decommitted from Michigan if Bryce Underwood if we weren't we weren't a legit contender for Bryce Underwood. Really like Benny Patterson. We'll continue to talk about where this program is going. And I think another one thing I'll add on Benny Patterson, the depth on the defensive line. It's a little bit of a problem for Michigan in 2024, right? Outside of Mason Graham and Kenny Grant and Rayshon Benny, there's not a ton of interior defensive line bodies that I think Michigan has a ton of trust in. Now it's a young position group right now, but you're going to need some bodies. And I think Michigan's going to attack this position in the transfer portal too, because you look at Benny Patterson and say, he's probably not a guy that's going to come in year one and play a lot of football for Michigan. He's more of a slower burn developmental prospect. I would be not surprised at all to see Michigan get really aggressive in the transfer portal for those interior defensive linemen because you just need that depth. What made Michigan so special in 2023? You were rotating so many good football players. I think Michigan kind of wants to get back to that depth and rotation on the defensive line. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Lou Esposito continuing to get it done on the recruiting trail. We'll talk to y'all later.